Grassroots, student-led, spontaneous. If you listen to the mainstream media, these are perfect descriptors of the March for Our Lives. But how about astroturfed, top-down, and an example of leftist indoctrination in our public schools? What's up guys, Sean here, doing a video in conjunction with the David Horowitz Freedom Center and StopK12Indoctrination.org. And today I'm going to explain to you how children are being taught in our public schools with our taxpayer money that the Second Amendment is evil and to advocate for gun control. Despite what you might hear from the mainstream media, all of us, all Americans, feel for the Parkland shooting victims. Every single one of us wants to find a solution to this problem, and while we might disagree on what that solution might be, that doesn't mean that one side is evil. Now, the media wants you to focus on the kids. In fact, the media wants you to attack the kids because the kids are promoting their agenda and they want to call you a bad person and link Second Amendment support to people who attack victims. But we're not going to do that. What's far more important is who's funding this march and how our children are being weaponized against us in our public schools. But first, let's talk about who actually showed up to the march. According to Dana Fisher, a sociologist writing for the Washington Post, only about 10% of the people that she sampled were under the age of 18. The median age of adult marchers was about 49 years old. So the idea that this was a youth movement or student-led movement is not borne out by the facts. Furthermore, of those sampled, only 27% reported not attending a previous march. So what that means is that about 3/4 of the protesters were people who are already into protesting Donald Trump. They showed up to previous marches. Now this shouldn't surprise anybody because the march was organized by the Women's March. The infrastructure is that of the Women's March. This march was largely female because the Women's March was largely female. So nobody should be surprised that most of the people who showed up were people who showed up to other marches. Now, even more interesting than that, of the 27% of people who showed up to this march as their first march ever, only 12% of them reported that gun control was their driving issue, their reason for showing up. So the idea that there's a youth movement for gun control sweeping the nation is pure nonsense. The idea that there is broad support in general for gun control legislation is also nonsense. The truth is that these marches cost money and professional leftist organizers have that money. But of course that's not the whole story. During my research for my last video on the Richmond, Virginia public school system, I discovered something troubling. On the official website for the Richmond public school system, the March for Our Lives was an official date marked off on their calendar. On top of that, the location for the meetup before they started marching was at a Richmond middle school. So here we have a clear-cut example of Richmond public school officials coordinating with this leftist gun control movement. And this wasn't the only organization that I talked about in the past that was coordinating with the March for Our Lives. The Working Educators, which is an organization that has its hand in constructing curriculum in Philadelphia, was actually backing this march as well. Unfortunately, it didn't stop there. Reaction Youth, which is an organization in New York City, actually bused students from New York City to the march in Washington, D.C. According to their website, Reaction Youth is an organization that teaches students in our public schools how to avoid gun violence. On the surface, that seems perfectly fine. Youth gun violence is a big problem, and an organization designed to prevent violence among our youth sounds wonderful. Unfortunately, when you look just beneath the surface even a little bit, you realize that Reaction Youth is an organization designed to indoctrinate our children, the children of New York City, against the Second Amendment. According to a PDF that's downloadable on the front page of their own website, Reaction Youth is a 30-week curriculum that concludes with taking children to Albany to lobby for gun restrictions. One of the stated goals of the program is to make sure teens no longer believe that guns can be used to protect them. They are also taught that the gun violence problem in New York City can be attributed to a lack of federal gun control legislation. In fact, it specifically lists a number of states with more lax gun control than New York City for the gun violence in New York City. So basically, they want your kids to take away the idea that gun control is good, and even when gun control doesn't work, the only reason it doesn't work is not because gun control is ineffective. It doesn't work because other people aren't doing gun control. If we only took all the guns, then everywhere would be perfectly safe and there would be no more gun violence. Everything would be awesome because guns literally cannot protect you. You will not believe that after you leave this program. It even says right here in plain English that these kids traveled to Washington, D.C. to advocate for gun control.
I've also asked the school board to make a part of every day some kind of anti-violence, anti-gun message. Every day, every school, at every level. One thing that I think is clear with young people and with adults as well is that we just have to be repetitive about this. It's not enough to simply have a catchy ad on a Monday and then only do it every Monday. We need to do this every day of the week and just really brainwash people into thinking about guns in a vastly different way.
I mean, think about how insidious this is. You're taking young kids, putting them in an after-school program to deal with the problem of gun violence. However, you're actually training them to be activists for your anti-gun agenda. So in effect, New York City taxpayers like me are subsidizing students' trips to Washington, D.C. to take away my gun rights. Yeah. That seems like a logical thing to do. Now, Reaction Youth isn't the only taxpayer-funded anti-gun organization propagandizing our children against us. Michael Bloomberg's anti-gun group Everytown actually tried to sneak anti-gun propaganda into our public schools. They didn't say that it was about promoting their agenda, but obviously Everytown is a political operator, and their curriculum was obviously designed to propagandize people against guns. There was this Common Core question from a few years ago, which claims that moderate, common-sense gun control can't get through the Congress because of the NRA, which is, of course, the way the left frames the gun control debate. There's all these people who don't want to get killed, but the evil NRA, they just won't stop trying to get children killed. This question was actually written by a leftist for NPR, and somehow it was lifted from NPR and moved into your children's curriculum. The purpose of education in a free society should be to teach kids how to think, not tell them what to think. However, clearly our public school system has that backwards. And it's not just overwhelming bias and indoctrination we're getting out of our public schools. The March for Our Lives has shown us how students and teachers get punished for wrongthink. There was a school in Minnesota who said that we're going to support the students' right to walk out and protest for the March for Our Lives, yet they punished a kid and threatened him with arrest for holding up a sign that said, "Guns don't kill people, people kill people."
No, you don't.
Yeah, we do.
On the
Policy
Supreme Court.
505 says you cannot.
Why?
Put anything on unless you get 24 hours.
I'm gonna go stand outside then.
And I will ask Officer Madden, yes.
Julianne Benzel, a teacher in California, was put on administrative leave for discussing the school's response to the March for Our Lives with her students. She informed the students of the issues surrounding the march, and she also informed the students about the school's position on the march and how they were allowing it. But then she asked them whether or not the school would hold the same policy of allowing the students to walk out of class if the march was pro-life instead of being pro-gun control. It's absurd. She wasn't taking the pro-life position. She was doing exactly what a teacher should do. Ask students to think critically about the issues of the day. But the message is clear. You don't toe the line in our public schools, and you're out of there. Just a side note, if you're in the state of California and you're a teacher convicted of having a sexual relationship with your students, you can still collect your pension. But Julianne Benzel, gotta get her out of there. Put her on administrative leave. She did wrong thing. Priorities, folks. Look, indoctrination in public education is a problem everywhere in this country. And if you want to fight back, consider going to stopk12indoctrination.org. Read over the Code of Ethics. We're trying to get it passed in multiple state legislatures. Join our efforts. Their goal is to train enough students through our public school system as left-wing activists so that we can't fight this in the future. You gotta get on board now. This has been Sean Fitzgerald for the David Horowitz Freedom Center and StopK12indoctrination.org. Till next time.